is Rogers TV.
NLCA Bill 2023, May 2nd to 3rd, from the NLCA Centre of Ecovation, Newfoundland's largest commercial industrial construction trade expo, showcasing the latest equipment advances and newest technology applications.
Well, here we are, another edition of Gale Force Winds, and it sure is good to be in the East End of St. John's, Newfoundland. I'm Alan Dale. With me, as always, my good buddy Jerry Carew. How are you, Jerry?
Jerry Carew is very good today, and I'll tell you why. I have someone that I'm introducing to you and introducing to all of you, someone that I got to know very well when you came here 17 years ago.
Pretty close to that, yeah.
This gentleman has done some amazing things in the with the YMCA in Newfoundland and Labrador and across Canada, actually. So I'm just really excited to get into it with Jason, and it's a pleasure to have you here, Jason.
Well, thanks very much for having me. A pleasure to be here.
Yeah, there's lots of parts of our community for sure, lots of organizations and institutions that make our community strong and make them thrive, and the YMCA is certainly one of those organizations. So we're certainly interested in having a conversation with Jason here today. Jason, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Well, sure. My name is Jason Brown, and I'm the CEO of the YMCA of Newfoundland and Labrador. And I've been in that role for most of the last 16 years.
That's fantastic. So where do you come from, Jason? What brings you here?
Well, I was born in Ontario, so at London, Ontario, lived in small...
And cut. Now, go ahead, please continue.
And I spent some time living in rural southern Ontario, Mitchell, and the Stratford area.
Okay.
Grew up mostly in Woodstock.
All right.
Went to university in London, Western University, and then my wife and I have lived in Ottawa for a number of years, almost 10 years. And prior to coming to St. John's, we also lived in Collingwood for about 3 years.
Wow.
And then in 2005, we made the move here, and it's very much home now.
Right. So both you and your wife from Ontario?
We are, yeah. We both grew up in Woodstock, and in fact, I think when we met, my wife told her now late mother told her mother that she'd finally met a boy that maybe her mother didn't know, and whose family her mother didn't know, and it turns out my grandmother babysat her mother when they were young children. So it's we grew up in Woodstock, and then moved all around Ontario, and now across 16 years ago to Newfoundland and Labrador together.
That it sounds to me like that part of Ontario is not unlike Newfoundland in terms of people knowing one another and perhaps caring for it. It is a beautiful part of the world, isn't it, down there?
Oh, sure. We're very happy to have come from there, and we still have lots of family in the area. And once the pandemic is a little bit further behind us, we're looking forward to seeing people again.
Yeah, for sure. So what put Newfoundland in your sights? Was that always something you wanted to do?
Well, yes, actually it was. We knew that in having a career in an organization like the YMCA, it gave us opportunities to live in different parts of the country. And I think a couple years before this job was posted, my wife was here for a conference.
Okay.
And came home saying, if we ever get a chance to live there, we've got to take the chance.
Right.
And so the job was posted, and then I applied and then interviewed and got offered the job, and and I can't quite believe it has been as long as it has, but it's been a real pleasure.
So what captured her attention at that conference that made her want to come here?
Well, I think that being in the outdoors is something that's always been important to us. Having grown up on canoe trips or going to summer camp or spending time at cottages, we also had the opportunity when we were younger to work in Nova Scotia, on the north shore of Nova Scotia, and so had that maritime experience, and then to extend that to a Newfoundland and Labrador experience seemed really appealing.
Right.
And I think her experience here as part of that conference, and then my experience through the interview, just meeting people and finding people friendly and welcoming, finding it to be a beautiful place, but also finding a real opportunity to take on a challenge in the job with a board and with the staff, and really try to give an organization a different future is what made it appealing as well.
And tell me about those first few days when you arrived in Newfoundland. Did you have children at the time?
Yes, we had a 2-year-old at the
Okay,
time,
right.
and so we always seem to move to new places in January or February. So there wasn't a snowstorm on the day that we moved, but it was uncertain whether or not I had come a little bit in advance to start work and to find a house. And in fact, I think you and I were traveling to Halifax for a meeting, and I think that it was uncertain that we would get to leave because of a snowstorm, and we did, and then moved, headed back to Ontario to pack up and move here, and then I think that the first few days here, there was still some snow on the ground. It was still a Newfoundland winter, and we started to explore a new community and move into our new house and introduce ourselves to people, and it's all a bit of a blur, but it was also a joy to be in a new place with new people and new challenges.
Tell me about that feeling of community when you arrived. Did you feel like you were coming from away, or did they embrace you right away?
Well, I think that we were fortunate to be coming to an organization where the board, and Jerry was the chair of the board at the time. Jerry's a real hero of our YMCA.
Here he goes with that word again.
Yeah, led the board through some really important changes, and so
it's easy to be a hero when you bring someone like you on board. But anyway.
Thanks. I found it to be part of an organization that already had deep roots in the community was really important, because it allowed us to connect through the board and through the staff and through other volunteers in a way that we might not otherwise have been able to connect. And so that was really important. And that's, I think that's the strength of the YMCA, the strength of organizations like the YMCA. It's an institution that's been here since 1854. So people know the organization and have connections and have deep roots. And that was a really important part of being welcome here and us embracing the place, because we felt like the place and the people were embracing us.
Really, yeah. It sounds like what you described there is not unlike a military move where you move into a community. There's a community established. Is that fair to say?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, Alan, I just want to throw something in there, Jason, to offer some perspective to anyone who's watching this. When you came, you said there were some challenges. There was enormous challenges, Alan. The YMCA in St. John's was teetering on its demise. Let's face it, we were burning through cash like there was no tomorrow. I was a young fellow in my 30s. When you came on board, what I really found interesting, and you taught me a lot about simplification and some of the techniques that you utilized to reinvigorate the Y. The Y at the time was undergoing a lot of competitive pressures. It had been the only and there's a lot more to the Y than just a gym, but from a gym perspective, there was a lot of problems with competition. Anyway, one thing that always impressed me, well, you invested in that bouncy ship. So this bouncy castle, Alan, picture that.
I know, yeah, David.
So the Y, everyone is leaving. There's no reason to be there. There's no feeling. There's no camaraderie. The community is disintegrating. This man brings a bouncy castle to the gym, and families start to come back. To me, I always look at that as a simple act, but then you sort of built on it. Anyway, that's my perspective of some of the things that you did that really reinvigorated the place.
Well, and that was important to do early on, because we had two goals early on, and one was for the organization to survive, and for it to survive long enough to do something different with it in the future. And so for it to survive, we had to find a way to bring people back to what was then our one main location in the east end of St. John's, the old Y building on New Cove Road. And bringing families back was an important part of that, and having people come back to exercise. I think at the time we established some of the first preschool regulated child care programs in addition to the school-age programs, and so that was an important connection to make. And at the very same time, we had to recognize quickly that it was time to leave that location to build a new location in St. John's to make sure that we could have a very different future and serve more people across the community in more different ways. And so the first 2 or 3 years was focused solely on two things: the organization surviving and creating a different future for ourselves.
Were you overwhelmed when you came into this scenario?
Well, it's at times, sure.
Yeah.
But fortunate, because there was a strong board in place. Jerry chaired the board, the vice chair.
I was overwhelmed, though.
Sure, the whole experience can be overwhelming at times,
Right.
but exciting at times, and challenging at times, and difficult at times. But it's really a lot of it is about leadership. So organizations survive because of leadership. Mm-hmm. Organizations create a different future for themselves because of leadership, and there's not just one leader. Particularly I think in nonprofit organizations, there's leaders on the board. Certainly there's the head of the organization, and that's my role as the CEO, but every employee is a leader as well. Every volunteer is a leader, and it's really just harnessing those abilities in people and focusing leadership abilities on the task at hand, or the tasks at hand, that I think can make the biggest difference. So we've been so fortunate, even in the early days, strong leadership on the board, people that weren't hesitating to make difficult decisions. And it's easy to get on a board, a volunteer, it's a 3-year term, and it's harder to get on a board and actually do things and make hard decisions that sometimes make people unhappy. Right. Or make people ask questions. And there was certainly some tension in the early days around the plans that were being put together. Mm-hmm. But I have to credit the leaders all around the organization for taking on the challenges and recognizing what needed to be done, and then actually setting about doing it.
Right. I love the way you describe leaders coming from everywhere. And it's so true. Leadership sprouts up everywhere if you allow it to happen. What were your techniques to allow those things to happen, to grow? Well,
and not just my techniques, because in reporting to a board, the board chair leads the board.
Right.
The CEO leads the staff, leads the organization, and it's really coming together in a partnership of staff and volunteers, recognizing that the board has a governance responsibility, a fiduciary responsibility, in some cases personal liability for the organization. Is important, and the board, recognizing the staff are trying to have a work-life balance, trying to get things done, have a rewarding career, taking risks of their own, and coming together in a partnership of staff and volunteers, I think, is a strength of a well-run YMCA organization. And we were able to do that, I think, fairly quickly from the beginning, and then sustain it for the last 16 years. And I think I'm on board chair number 8 now, and have a similar kind of partnership, and each unique, each bringing a set of experiences that are important to the time of the organization, but I think more importantly, each rising to the challenge of doing what needs to be done. And so we've been very fortunate to have that kind of leadership on the board and have that kind of partnership.
Well, and it's funny, Alan, because as the chair and a guy who's trying to learn on the job and learn from you, my heart went out to you many times, because it's one thing to have a boss. Jason's bosses, there's a lot of them. Right. The community, the board. And I felt part of my role was to try and keep the board in its place, because I remember the debate between, operations versus strategic vision. And there was time, I'll never forget it, one time one of the board members was complaining about the paint in the shower. And I'm like, really? You're a board member and you're going to talk about paint in our shower? Like, to me, I was still learning, but I mean, the interaction that you and I had and the teaching that you gave me was phenomenal. And I think listening to you having 8 cheers, God bless you all that are volunteering. But I mean, I think a lot of it, Alan, is trust, and trusting the person that's in the job is the right person. And this man is the right person.
Okay, well, let's tap into that for a second then. So first of all, where did you get off taking over the board at 30-odd years old? Who did you think you were? What was driving you at that point, Jerry, to be the chairman of the board for the YMCA?
I have one person to thank, Leanne O'Leary. Thank you. But no, thank you. My wife was pregnant with our first child when I was asked, and I knew that there was challenges. Board meetings were 3-4 hours long. We were burning through cash. Where do I get off? I don't know, Alan. I mean, it was like, I love the place. When you get involved in the YMCA, and you've heard me tell this story, the thing that got me was a young lady came in. Her parents were both addicted to drugs and alcohol. And one of the things that the board would do is bring in young leaders to talk about their experience. So she talked about youth leadership.
Right.
The YMCA was the very first place that she found hope.
Wow.
That is why I wanted to give of myself. Did I
Right.
feel I had the skills? Absolutely not. I was sitting around a board of people that were well known in the community, lawyers, accountants, business owners, and I'm this guy selling advertising. But again, to his point, everybody rode in the same direction. Everybody wanted the same thing, and I still pinch myself as to the fortunate. They say may you live in interesting times. Well, I mean, when you're on a community organization that's burning through cash so rapidly, it was scary. It was. So anyway,
I know that's a beautiful explanation, Jerry, of why you wanted to take on that responsibility, but also a great recognition that you were young and probably inexperienced doing it. So what did it feel like when he walked through the door to get interviewed? How were you feeling then?
well, I mean, we had a bunch of candidates that were extremely talented people. The one thing that got me about Jason, though, is he had Y experience. He was organized, but an articulate speaker. And I felt that he could lead me. And I think that's what we needed at the time. The young people that were employed at the Y needed hope. And if we're an organization that gives hope in the community, if we don't have hope within the staff, then what the hell are we trying to do?
Yeah.
So, he had me at hello.
So, listen, it's not very often you get a debrief on a job interview 17 years later. This has to be a first. So that's fantastic, guys. I'm glad that we walked through that whole thing. So there you are, the both of you are working together. Basically, in my mind, I see you stop the water from coming in the ship, and you're getting back to floating again, ready to turn the engines on, and now you're ready to kind of go back to sea, as it were. So where are we now in the moment with the YMCA, and you, personally, on your journey, where are we now in the moment?
Well, now we have been through almost 2 years of the COVID-19 pandemic, and at the beginning of the pandemic, we had another one of those periods in our history where there was a lot of uncertainty. Mm-hmm. And so, and the uncertainty included, would the organization survive this? We managed to accomplish a number of things that we wanted to. We were serving people in more communities in more ways, and then all of a sudden we're hit with the pandemic. And so, would the organization survive? At the same time, we had a number of projects underway that were important to the future of the organization. So we were back to a situation of, can the organization survive long enough? And making that our focus in order to do these other things we want to do. So we've changed our name a couple times in the last 15 or 16 years. We're now the YMCA of Newfoundland and Labrador. And the one new location in St. John's is what has allowed us to become essentially a province-wide organization. And it took that major project in the capital city and it being successful and other communities seeing it being successful to give us a different future in different parts of the province. So just about 6 years ago, the Marystown YMCA opened, and it's a different project because the town owns the building and the YMCA is the long-term operator. Mm-hmm. So we were able to take a very positive experience in St. John's and spread it to the Burin Peninsula and engage even more people. Along the way, on the Avalon Peninsula, we've grown the childcare operation. We've managed to regrow the employment, enterprise, and newcomer services operation, and it's now spreading across the province. And one of the projects that we actually had under construction as the pandemic hit was the new YMCA in Happy Valley, Goose Bay, Labrador. And there was uncertainty there as well. How would the project proceed through a pandemic with travel restrictions and uncertainty? And it's not hard to forget the fear that people had at the time. How long would this last? Will I get sick? Will I die? Will my family be okay? Will I lose my job? There was a lot of things that people were thinking, that I was thinking, that our employees were thinking at the time that we had to work through. So the good news is the organization survived the pandemic. That wasn't a sure thing at the beginning. The federal supports have made the biggest difference to us.
Right, yeah.
The community support has made a big difference to us. The fact that the case counts in this province have been low, and we've been closed in some of our operations for 6 of the last 19 months, but open for much of it. And we're now at a point where we can emerge from the pandemic stronger. So the St. John's operation is strengthening. The child care operation is growing. The Marystown operation is strengthening. And we've managed to open the new YMCA in Happy Valley Goose Bay. We wanted to have 1,000 members by the end of the first year of operation. And the facility opened in July, and we're at 1,013 members today.
Wow.
So that's a community that really needed services like we offer. It's a building owned by the town, operated by the YMCA under long-term agreements, and it's working. The community is responding well, and so I expect that we'll keep growing in membership there. And I feel very good to have had a strong team, to have strong leaders on the board. We had some very difficult times through the pandemic. We needed to lay off staff, about 175 staff, and 2 rounds of layoffs through the pandemic, and many have come back. And we managed to, I think, weather the pandemic well and keep ourselves in a position where we could still have a strong future.
You know, I just want to say, you know, Jason, I thought about you a lot during the pandemic. You know, we've all had a different experience, Alan. You know, I've talked about this.
Sure, yeah.
This man and many others who've been leading relatively large organizations. I mean, it's not in the YMCA's DNA to lay people off. Mm-hmm. Man, you had to do that twice.
Yeah.
Like, wow. My heart goes out to you and all of the affected people at the Y,
yeah,
and any other place that had that happen to them, you know?
But the statement that they've come back says a lot. They were clearly laid off in a very respectful, responsible fashion, and probably you articulated to them quite clearly why this has to happen.
Yeah.
And you were able to kind of navigate through these tumultuous times to come out the other end. I'm curious, and maybe I should have asked it out of the gate, but what is the history of the YMCA and what is its mandate?
Well, the YMCA started worldwide in London, England in the 1850s, and Sir George Williams was the founder of the YMCA, and it was part of the industrialization of the UK, where there were young workers from rural parts of the country coming to London who needed a place to gather, a place to learn, a place to be together in a setting that they could have some recreation or have some learning, and it grew into a worldwide organization from there. So in Canada, the first YMCA in the country was in Montreal, and soon grew across the country. Our YMCA here in Newfoundland and Labrador was established nearly 100 years before Confederation with Canada in 1854. Wow. And it's interesting to go through our organization's history. One of the original locations is actually the King George V building on Water Street. And in fact, someone dropped off a number of years ago an old handwritten minute book from when the organization was in there. Wow. With some other organizations. There was a swimming pool, there was residences, there was a bowling alley, and it's really interesting to know that history. You know, my personal history is wrapped up in the YMCA as well. When my late paternal grandfather, John Brown, was a lieutenant in the Canadian Army, born in Scotland, immigrated to Canada in the Queen's Own Rifles during the Second World War. And his first experience with the YMCA was overseas in YMCA war services. Right. Canadian YMCA and other YMCAs around the world provided service to soldiers. In this case, it was in the form of a YMCA war services tent where they could show movies from home. And so he saw his infant daughter for the first time on an old 8mm movie reel in a YMCA war services tent in Holland. And so that, when he came home from the war, he didn't ever talk much about the war, but he did talk about that experience. He wanted his family to be connected to the YMCA. And so 4 children, 12 grandchildren, encouraged us all to go to summer camp, to be members of the Y. He was a board member of the YMCA, and before he died, a major donor and a life member of the YMCA in London, Ontario. So it's throughout the world, across the country, in my life, in our community, in Newfoundland and Labrador, the YMCA is a generational kind of organization where people are connected through generations. I think your family's the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're right. No, my wife taught aerobics at the Y for 30 years. Every Friday for 30 years, you know.
That's an incredible story of your connection to the YMCA through wartime service, and wow. So, and thank you for the history of the Y. I'm sure many of our guests are probably not aware of the deep history that it has globally. And so what is its mandate? What is the mandate of the YMCA?
Well, it's changed over the years. Currently, we're about building healthy communities. And so our main programs are health, fitness, and aquatics, where people can exercise or learn to swim or take a fitness class. So people can move from being unhealthy to healthy, or they can volunteer to help others. And we don't turn people away for inability to pay program fees. We find a way to help them through the financial assistance program. So there might be somebody who arrived in a very expensive car and another person who arrived by bus.
Right.
And they're exercising side by side, you know, and experiencing that sense of community, that connection to others side by side while they're exercising and becoming healthier. Now, the YMCA is also among the largest, if not the largest, provider of regulated childcare in this province. So that's another one of our mandates, to support families, to support women in the workforce, to support communities by caring for children. And it's not a babysitting service. Regulated childcare, particularly in the way that we deliver it, is intended to be educational. So children learn through their experiences of playing at the YMCA. We also have employment programs and enterprise entrepreneurship programs. But before my time, some of the talented staff here developed a program, I think in response to the COD moratorium, called the Enterprise Olympics, where there's a YMCA published textbook in every high school across the province as part of the entrepreneurship course. And the YMCA then works with the teachers to create, through competition, the students coming up with business ideas, and culminating every year with the Enterprise Olympics, where students come together.
I bet you never knew that, eh?
I tell you.
There's a lot more to the Y than a gym. Sorry for cutting you off.
That's okay.
Right?
No, I'm telling you, this is unbelievable. I'm so glad I'm having this conversation.
Well, we've had to do it on the line the last couple of years, but we believe we'll be able to do it in person in 2022. And it's students competing their business ideas with business leaders from around the community coming in and offering advice, and then coming up with the finalists, and then the eventual, you know, gold, silver, and bronze winners of it. And there are actually businesses today in this community, startups, where the entrepreneurs in charge started not in high school, but actually in junior high school through a YMCA program where we talked about entrepreneurship, and then they came up through the Enterprise Olympics, and then through our business planning program, where either through us or on their own or another organization have launched their own business. And so that's